Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and I want to talk about conversion commitment. All right. So the reason why I want to talk about this is I'm incredibly blessed, and I'm literally on my way right now to my first session of Dungeons and Dragons Pokemon. All right. So my Storm Dungeon Master, that's what I'm going to call him. He invited me to this game, and I'm going to my first session, and I am truly astounded of what this dungeon master committed to create. I would like to say the holy grail of Dungeons and Dragons conversions, right? But I'm not positive that Pokemon is the holy grail of Dungeons and Dragons conversions. What is the holy grail of Dungeons and Dragons conversions, right? And this is a dungeon master who's like, I'm going to run this world with Dungeons and Dragons. And this was highly discouraged, right? Before 2023, January 2023, the OGL crisis, January 2023, the Manic Panic, right? Which really split the entire tabletop role-playing game world in half, right? And so there were a lot of people who were like, oh, if you want to run something, there are holy grail properties for Dungeons and Dragons, and these are intellectual properties that have never been officially converted to Dungeons and Dragons, right? Star Wars is one of these, but we actually had a D20 Star Wars in 3rd edition, but Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro lost it. They lost the license to that, right? And that is now with FFG. That license is continuing forward and is going forward, and that is currently being made, right? And actually, so as under Fantasy Flight Games, and it has its own innovative dice and all that. There's also Harry Potter, so there's no license. You cannot play official Dungeons and Dragons Harry Potter. And then I think Marvel and DC both qualify. And I don't know about Lord of the Rings, because that gets weird, because they literally just did a 5e Dungeons and Dragons. So that conversion has been, but even that was just started. Right, that was just started, so that's brand new. So you don't even have that much. It's not a robust system. It's just 1 or 2 books, right? But this Dungeon Master is converting Pokemon, right? So I want to talk about literally the conversion commitment. What was the commitment of this Dungeon Master to make Pokemon playable in Dungeons and Dragons, right? So first of all, I can tell you right now, there was 3 months, right? So I read 3 different documents this weekend. I read a location document. The location document was kind of odd, because I don't understand why the Dungeon Master didn't just keep Kanto, Kalos, Sinnoh. He made his own locations, and literally mapped them over the actual location, the Pokemon map location, would seem completely unnecessary. I don't understand why the Dungeon Master took the time to create their own locations. That seems odd to me, but I read all of the locations, and it wasn't too crazy. It was 2 or 3 pages of conversions for the locations. And I think one of the reasons why they did that was they didn't want people saying, oh, well, this Pokemon isn't in this region, maybe, but trainers carry them everywhere, so it's kind of odd. I'm not sure why he did that. And then I read an entire document that was all the existing players and their Pokemon, and then I read the guide, and the guide was this Dungeon Master spent 3 months doing the math to convert Pokemon levels, which they go from 0 to 100, all the way to 20, right? And then basically he had to figure out a system to convert Pokemon levels to the 20 levels of play in Dungeons and Dragons, because we're each playing an individual Pokemon, and so we want to go through all 100 levels, but essentially it'll be 5 levels per. But that's not quite right, and they're so he had to do a conversion of the math. And then the biggest thing, and this is the real conversion commitment, he had to build a system which would allow him to convert each move that a Pokemon has into a specific Dungeons & Dragons spell, right? That is pretty, and it's wild, right? So he had to do like 50 Pokemon before the game even started, and then he was also committed to building a spell for every single move for every Pokemon that a player character chose, right? And so before he even started the game, he needed to convert 50 to 100 Pokemon that would be usable as Pokemon that the player character Pokemons fought, right? And so like I just did Phanpy, and he had not done the conversion on that. So I'm coming in at 4th level, which means that he had to convert every 2nd, 1st, and cantrip level. He had to convert. So I'm coming in at 4th level, right? So that would be up to 20th level, 20th level in Pokemon levels, right? So he had to convert every move that Phanpy would get up to 20th level in the game, in the Pokemon, in Pokemon levels. He had to convert every single one of those spells, and it was about a dozen spells. So he gave me a dozen spells, right? All that are Phanpy specific. And then, and now he is also committed to converting every move that Phanpy gets that is Phanpy specific. So he has to convert the Phanpy move list to each move to a specific Dungeons & Dragons, what's the word I'm looking for? A spell, to a specific spell, right? And so in order to do this, he had to do 3 months of math to figure out a process to actually accurately convey the Pokemon battle system, right, into Dungeons & Dragons. And the reality is, since there's 1,000 Pokemon, he couldn't possibly do all that even in 3 months. But basically, he's at a point where he can create he can create 1 to 5 new Pokemon for every single session, right? And he can and whenever a new player goes into the game, he has to convert every single thing on their chosen Pokemon's level 2 spells. So this is a pretty high level of conversion commitment, right? And basically any and all of these, like if you did Marvel or DC, you would need to convert powers, right? If you do Star Wars, you need to convert Jedi powers, right? And so anytime you do this and you say, I'm going to run this for Dungeons and Dragons, these conversion commitments are very real, right? And this is a very high conversion commitment on Pokemon. And this Dungeon Master spent 3 months building systems to run this, and it has to actively do continual conversion as the campaign is going forward. And then what's really sad, what breaks my heart, is none of this will ever be releasable, right? Like you can't, like he could not release any of this because Pokemon is licensed, right? Now what he could do, I think, is he could do a 50 Shades of Grey, right? Like, so 50 Shades of Grey is literally Twilight fan fiction that was just skinned, right? So he could do a skin of this, right? And then release a 5e book, which I think is interesting. And honestly, he's done so much work that I actually think it might be worth it, right? Like, but I'm very honored to have been invited to the game. I'm very impressed with the level of conversion commitment that he's met already. And I think it's worth thinking about, like, when you decide to bring an intellectual property into Dungeons & Dragons that has never been officially licensed, right? It's pretty wild. And like, which ones have? Right now, in current Dungeons & Dragons, the only thing that's actually licensed is Rick and Morty, Stranger Things, and that's it. Am I right? Like, that's the only ones that are. And actually, then also, actually officially connected to Dungeons & Dragons is everything in Funko Pops, everything in Legos, and everything in Magic the Gathering. Oh, and Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering have had full, robust, official conversions, right? And so I think that's very interesting to think about. I just wanted to share that with you. What is your experiences with conversion commitment? Where have you committed? Have you been in a game where a dungeon master committed to doing the conversion but then didn't deliver? I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear. So I'm sharing my experience with you. I'd love to hear about your experience. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.